So this video is going to look at the written source on art and architecture, which is Plutarch Pericles 12-14. There are references to some of the statues that were built in this period under the religion section, but when you look at the religion video, I will make references to these. So as we're talking about Pericles and his building program, this source can be linked to quite a number of different places. It can obviously be linked to art and architecture, which is his main purpose, but we can also link it to Pericles' power as a demagogue. We can also link it to Section A with the Peloponnesian War in terms of the effects of conflict for the Allies and for the Athenians. And we can also link it, an element of this, to participation as well. So there's lots of different ways you can use this particular source. So if we start from the top of Plutarch Pericles 12, but that which brought most splendid adornment to Athens and the greatest amazement, to the rest of mankind, which alone now testifies for Hellas to her ancient power and splendour. So part of the, weird pause. One of the things we have to think about when we're looking at these sources is the reasons behind the building programme. Was it religious or was it other factors? One of our key themes is the idea that Athens was trying to show that they were really powerful over their enemies, their neighbours, and also probably over the Persians. So we have quite a nice little quote to show this particular aspect as well. So of which was no idle fiction, construction of sacred effigies, so that's like the temples. This more than all of the public measures of Pericles, his enemies maligned and slandered. So as we look through the source, we'll find out why Pericles has been attacked for this. But what we do have here is a quote to show that Pericles, as a demagogue, had enemies, was being attacked and was brought to some sort of justice over his use of the money. So again, we have this evidence to show that demagogues were not always in complete control of the democracy. And they cried out in the assemblies, the people have lost its fair fame and its ill repute, because it has removed the public monies of the Hellenes from Delos into its own keeping. So remember, during the Peloponnesian War, we're talking during the First Peloponnesian War, all of the Greeks, such as the Hellenes, who were part of the Delian League, deposited their tribute in the treasury that was kept at Delos. And in 454 BC, the treasury was moved from Delos into Athens to be looked after by the Athenian government. So we have a nice quote to show that particular point. And that seemingly of all excuses which it had to urge against his accusers, to wit, that out of fear of the barbarians, Persians, it took the public funds from that sacred isle and was now guarding them in a stronghold. Of this, Pericles has robbed it. So he was accused essentially of misusing the money from the tribute for the beautification of Athens. And to be honest, they had a fair point. However, it says it here, I'll come back to the point I'm going to say for a second. So surely Hellas is insulted with dire insult and manifestly subject to tyranny when she sees that with their own enforced contributions for the war. So there's an effective conflict for Section A because they're being forced to pay contributions. We are gilding and bedizening our city, i.e. making it look really pretty. For all the world like a wanton woman, adds to her wardrobe precious stones and costly statues and temples worth their millions. So Athens looks really glittery and pretty, but we're using the money that was supposed to be for the war and we're using it to build lots of pretty buildings. So that's what Pericles was being attacked for. So for his part, Pericles would instruct the people that owed no account of the monies to the allies. So again, that ties really nicely into Section A of the Peloponnesian War about effects of conflict. That Athens is kind of benefiting here in terms of they're getting a positive effect of conflict because they can build lots of pretty stuff. But the allies are being treated really badly. This also links, I should point out, for Section B, this section, into Athens as the leader of the empire, because they could ask us questions about the treatment of the allies. You can obviously use anything from Section A for this. That's the joy of doing this particular option. But obviously there are specific sources we do have to look at for the empire, and this links into this as well. Provided it carried on the war for them and kept off the barbarians. Remember, that is the real reason, the official reason for the Delian League collecting tribute. It's to build ships, it's to hire mercenaries and sailors, so on and so forth, to stop the Persians coming back. And then this person still attacking, not a horse to the furnished city, not a ship, not a hoplite, but money simply, and this belongs not to those who give it, but those who take it. If only they furnish that for which they take it in pay, but it is and it is but meet that the city, once she is sufficiently equipped with all that is necessary for prosecuting the war, should apply her abundance to such works as by their completion will bring her everlasting glory. So that is Pericles' defence. So he's saying, yeah, okay, look, yes, we're collecting the money, and yes, it's being used to build the boats and all the rest of it, and we're doing all those things. But, it's our money. We're the head of the Daily League. We can do whatever we like. So since we spent it on sort of continuing with the war, we now have the ability to spend it on works to bring ourselves everlasting glory. And that's what the rest of this particular section is talking about. Okay. Now what it's going to talk about is some of the positive effects, again, that this building work is going to bring and sort of the costs of it. So it is true that this military expedition supplied those who were in full vigour of manhood with abundant resources from the common funds. So the soldiers being well paid, so that's a positive effect of conflict. We could talk about that Athens economically is doing really well in the war. So I'm just rereading what we're reading. So then Pericles suggests to the people projects for great construction designed to work. So there's our building programme. And would call many arts into play, involve long periods of time. Fine, it makes sense. And that everybody should benefit from this wealth being brought in from the Allies. So then we have the idea of how much it was going to cost. So the materials to be used were stone, bronze, ivory, gold, ebony, and cypress wood. So, gold, ebony, and ivory, very expensive products, very expensive materials. Now, because they're using this to build temples on the Acropolis, you could link this to religion to show that there was the importance of religion, because they were spending a huge amount of money here for the sort of statues of Athena and the Parthenon, etc. But it does show that they have this huge pot of money as well, because they're the leader of the empire. And then this section here is basically talking about, and I've highlighted a little bit here, about unskilled and untrained labourers, that it's bringing lots of employment. So, you've got your carpenters, you've got your moulders, wagon makers, trainers, drivers. So everybody is benefiting from this influx of money being put into the building work. High levels of employment, everybody's happy. Pericles is a wonderful guy. Excuse me. So then it's going to talk a little bit about the actual building work here. As you can see, I've not highlighted loads. So then the works arose, no towering in their grandeur, then inimitable in their grace of outline. So these were fantastic big buildings. They were sort of special to everybody else. Everybody was trying really hard to build them, and everything was really pretty. And it was all done within this single administration. So most of the buildings for Pericles' building programme was completed under him, which is good. And we've got a painter sort of saying, minor betics will take longer. Okay, fine. A simple quote here, the works of Pericles all the more to be wondered at because they're created really quickly. So they're beautiful and they will produce really, really fast. Talks about his main sculptor, which is Phidias, which again, not really that important. But we have a mention of the Parthenon, for instance, with this cell of 100 feet in length, shows you how big this particular building. Then it talks about different architects that were being used. We're going to skim that because I don't really care about architects. The Odeum is another building. That's Pericles' building programme. So it's arranged in turn with many tiers of seats and many pillars. That the roof was made an exact reproduction of the Great King's Pavilion. So the Great King, remembering the King of Persia, is what we're referring to. So it's a really nice description of the Odeum, and it's showing that it's obviously really, really large. I'm going to skip over this random bit of a poem. Sorry, there's something clicking in my house. I think my cat's trying to come in. Not that you care, but I can hear it in the background, and it's really off-putting because he's being a pain. Anyway, so Pericles, so fond of honour was he, get a decree passed that a musical contest be held as part of the Panathenaic festival. So this is one of the main festivals celebrating Athena and Athenian society. So there's going to be a musical contest. So this links really nicely into religion. So you've got a musical contest of witness in the Odeum. So that's where they're kind of taking place. So again, that's why it's in the art and architecture section. We also got the proper layer of the Acropolis is then brought to completion, done really quickly. Talks about sort of description about someone falling from a great height and being really ill, and he was healed by the gods. But okay, fine. As a result, Pericles sets up a bronze statue of Athena. So again, another really simple quote to show the importance of religion, because it's another Athena temple. And again, it's just sort of talking about it being built. all of these actions in terms of Pericles using all the money and the massive buildings and the pretty buildings, this brings envy upon the sculptor, and also this anger on Pericles. Oh, sorry, I'm just reading because I can't remember what this next section is talking about. So then we've got some kind of like people trying to attack Pericles in this section, talking about how he's using like peacocks to bribe women and all the rest of it. So if you want to read that, you can. But ultimately, it's not particularly relevant. The relevancy of Pericles being attacked is in this section. So Thucydides, not the author, and his party kept denouncing Pericles for playing fast and loose with the public monies. So again, we have the idea that demagogues like Pericles did not have complete control over the Athenian people, over the democracy, because they were being attacked, and he's forced to defend himself. So then he goes into the assembly, which is also where decisions are made, is why it's part of participation, whether they thought he had expended too much, and on the declaring that it was altogether too much. So actually, if we highlight that for participation, it's a handy little quote about the people holding politicians to account. Well then, he said, let it not have been spent on your account but mine, and I will make the inscription of my dedication in my own name. So he's sort of saying, well, okay, if I'm spending too much, it's fine, I'll pay for it. And then obviously I'll put all the dedications in my own name instead of the people's name. So because he said this, they thought, oh yeah, you know, he's being really sort of good, because he's saying, yeah, okay, maybe I'm spending a bit too much, I'll pay it out of my own pocket. Well, maybe they want to get glory of the works as well. They cried out with a loud voice and bade him to take freely from the public funds of his outlays. So there's me up here saying, oh, but it shows that they don't have control of the democracy. However, Pericles then uses rhetoric, and then he has control of the democracy again. So again, this links obviously into the power of demagogues, really useful for participation, and obviously it does talk about the buildings as well. We also have a little bit an element here about ostracism. So he manages to get Thucydides ostracized, which is useful for showing the power and the role of the different institutions. You'll notice in your source book, if I scroll down, there are pictures of the different temples. So there's the Propylaea that's mentioned, the Odeon of Pericles. This is the biggest statue that's built. There's the Parthenon. All these different elements, which I'm just kind of skimming over really quickly, we will talk about in lesson. I don't particularly want to talk, well, I'm not going to actually talk through in a video, because it will take way too long, and obviously you've got other things you need to be looking at in terms of the source material. Otherwise, that is the written sources for the art and architecture section.